I speak to you in the name of the one holy and living God. Please be seated. Well, it was a perfectly turned cerulean vase with subtle flecks of sky and ocean. Somehow it managed to survive several careers, significant downsizing, years in storage, and 5 major moves, until the evening I came home, and I found a jagged shard of thin porcelain lying on the floor. Well, immediately my eyes moved to appraise this treasure, a treasure that I'd acquired at the Renwick Gallery in Washington, D.C. 30 years ago. The graceful lines of this elegant vessel remained intact on one side, but when I turned it around, it revealed a ragged wound that even a surgeon's hands could not mend. Heartsick, I placed the vase on a high shelf or counter, the intact side facing my living room, and the craggy cleft facing the kitchen, where for nearly a year it presided. And I pondered, how can something simultaneously be so elegant and valuable and so damaged and worthless? I also have to confess, I kept asking myself, why am I clinging? Why am I clinging to this disfigured form? So hold that thought, and I'm going to ask you to leap with me and shift some gears. Many of you have read our bishop's letter describing the 3-phase process for, in her words, gathering in the world in which we find ourselves, and how we will gather safely, caring for the life of every member of our flock. Well, as you might imagine, I've spent many hours considering this process. And on Thursday evening, our leadership will have a Zoom meeting to discuss how and when to implement the significant changes that are required. So, decisions about when to proceed from phase 1, in which we are now not gathering, to phase 2, which allows limited gathering, are reasonably driven by science and data. Waiting until we have 14 days of consistently declining numbers of new COVID viruses, cases of COVID virus reported in Pima County. Okay. Then limiting the number of people to less than 50. Doing such things as maintaining rigorous cleaning of the facility procedures, wearing masks and washing hands and maintaining social distance. All of these guidelines comport with the CDC. So reading through these, in my mind, I'm checking off boxes. Okay, we can do that. A little bit awkward, we'll work that out. Until I come to the section about worship. And then I feel my heart slip. No procession down aisles that would put the liturgical party within 6 feet on either side of any worshipers. No choir. No congregational singing, no God's place. Readers must wear masks. No passing of the alms basin. The priest may remove her mask to preach if the lectern is at least 15 feet away from any person. But she must put the mask on during the prayer of consecration. Bread alone will be distributed during communion of the people. And bread cannot be bread. It must be communion wafers. Oh my. What? What if our simple and elegant liturgy will be preserved? Prohibiting processions, singing, and communion wine is like breaking a shard from a prized porcelain vase. And so once again, I find myself standing between this and that, between the way it was intact and the way it is now. And I feel heartsick. Having learned the hard way, that skipping too fast over feelings, over heartbreak, never heals the wound, I decided to cut myself some slack and give myself some space, to lean into my distress, to embrace this uncharted territory, and to express it to you. Well, by grace, it was not too long, and by not too long I mean several days, before a book that I had not thought of for years came to mind. When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron. Now, I wrote about this book in our Thursday email blast because the wisdom is timeless and it breaches the boundaries of any religion or tradition. And I believe the words of the wise American Tibetan Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron bear repeating. We think that the point is to pass the test or overcome the problem, overcome this COVID virus problem. But the truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together and they fall apart. And they come together again and they fall apart again. It's just like that. The healing comes from letting there be room. Letting there be room for all of this to happen. Room for grief, for relief, for misery, and for joy. So Pema Chodron's counsel opened the way for me to stand in this wobbly, dark place between the way things were and the way things are, between the intact and the broken liturgy, and to give myself room to feel heartbreak, heartsick, and uncertain. But you see, this wobbly, in-between place, this is the place from which new possibilities, new life arises. It's when we are all stirred up and floundering around, not knowing what to do or where to go or where we come from, that the Spirit of God is at work within us. And so we dare not rush through or try to skip over this part of our life experience. In fact, I would argue that we must welcome our feelings, welcome our uncertainty, welcome reality exactly as it is, this present moment. And then lean into our feelings of sadness, disappointment, confusion, while waiting to be surprised by God. Now, here's the thing. I did not tell you the circumstances of being in Washington, D.C. when I acquired my precious cerulean vase. I had been subpoenaed by the FBI to testify with regard to research findings and recommendations I had made 10 years prior. Well, a full day of preparation by top-floor corner office attorneys, followed by 10 relentless hours of grilling and questioning by 3 FBI agent attorneys, left me utterly spent, at my wits' end, swimming in odious ugliness. So when at last I walked outside of the FBI building, it was dark, and the driver who was assigned to my transport was waiting, and I said, I gotta walk. He looked at me in my high heel shoes, he shook his head, and he said, Georgetown's that way. Well, I literally walked the heels off of my shoes while searching for a coherent thought or feeling. Sleep was not my friend that night, so early the next morning, I made my way to the Renwick Gallery. And after perusing the American Crafts exhibit, I ascended the beautiful crimson carpeted staircase. When I got to the top, I noticed standing off to the side a man who by dress and by demeanor appeared to be homeless. And I wondered, I wonder if he had come, as I had, for comfort in this place. Well, the best way to view art in the upstairs salon is by sitting on one of those round settees, you know, the kind you see on Downton Abbey, which is what I did. And I don't know how long I sat there in the silence before the silence was broken by the penetrating voice of this incredible tenor. He was singing what I eventually recognized as Rodolfo's aria in Puccini's La Bohème. So I sort of slipped around the side of my settee, and I discovered the homeless man was the amazing tenor. And I burst into tears. Tears sufficient to wash away 2 days of dross. Tears that washed onto my lap and completely cleansed me. And before leaving the Renwick, I purchased the perfectly formed cerulean vase to remind me that no matter how dark and ugly the night, give myself space and lean into my feelings and wait. Wait to be surprised by God. Dear people of God, we have just begun to stand in that wobbly, dark place between the way church was and the way church is. So let us be kind and gentle with ourselves and with one another. Let us make room for ourselves to lean into our feelings and uncertainty, knowing that when the apostles lost their teacher, their friend, their Jesus to death, they were not left orphans. The Spirit of truth was awakened within them, closer than their own breath, restoring them to new and abundant life they could not have imagined. Yes, in the midst of their loss and uncertainty, the disciples and the apostles were surprised by God. And surely, we will be too. Amen.